So welcome, and today's focus is on why writing matters. I'm Chris Street from Cal State Fullerton, and we'll be together to talk about what I think is a really important topic. So our goals for today. Um, I want to talk a little bit about why writing matters, discuss the power of our feedback as teachers, talk a little bit about why providing quality feedback is so important, and then talk about some of the issues that you are facing when you're using writing in your classrooms, including AI, because that's on everybody's minds now. So, one big question is why invest the time required to teach writing well? And this is one of my favorite authors. Her name is Carol Jago. This is from a book she wrote called Papers, Papers, Papers. And she says, we can't quit. The work is too important. And it really is. We need to have students who can write well. And her voice is not the only one out there about this need for writing. So there was a report that came out a few years ago now called the Neglected R, and it was all about why writing is so important and how it oftentimes is neglected. And one of the quotes I like from this report is, writing today is not a frill for the few, but an essential skill for the many. And it really is important. So we'll talk about that. Same group that did that report had these recommendations: that schools double the amount of time that students spend writing, that every school has a writing plan in every school district, so that we have a plan at the district level in terms of how writing is getting taught, and insist that writing be taught in all subjects and at all grade levels. So that's this commission's recommendation. Doesn't typically happen in schools, but I think it would help a lot if it did. There was a survey that went out to junior college CSU faculty and UC faculty across the state of California. This came out in 2002, so it's really old now. But the reason I still cite this is because these stats are still very much the same. So when this report came out, this poll came out of California college level faculty, they found that only about a third of entering college students were prepared for most college level writing tasks. So this was 20 years ago, and today the numbers haven't shifted a whole lot. And from this report, more than 50% of these faculty students couldn't produce papers that were relatively free of language errors. So all of these faculty at all three levels in our state, two-year college, CSU, and UC, all agreed that writing was a real area of need. So just going to have these three quotes up here. I'm not going to read them all, but maybe you can take a quick look at them and see what you think about these three quotes. One, they're all from industry, and they're all highlighting the importance of writing and communication skills. And the one I like the most is the second one, I think. Inadequate communication skills will have a direct bearing on a college graduate's promotion opportunities. So oftentimes people get a job, an entry-level position, and then as they move up in a company, their technical skills become a little less important because now they're managing and they're needing to communicate with the people they're managing. They're writing reports, they are in high-level meetings. So communication skills really, really matter, especially in terms of moving up in your career. So the bottom line is that research suggests that when students write in their classes, they learn more effectively. So this is a good selling point for teachers, because a lot of teachers in various disciplines other than English, they've never had a class on how to teach writing. They don't know how to use writing in their courses because that wasn't part of their professional preparation. But the good thing is that when kids are writing about our disciplines, they're learning our content more effectively. That's why, in my mind, writing matters and works for it's worth investing the time. So, real quickly, Jessica, thinking about a challenge that you can think of when you consider asking kids to write in your class, what's a challenge that pops to mind?
Any challenge when teaching?
Any challenge when teaching and using writing with your kids?
I think based upon my experience, I think it's the initial reaction. Like as we have talked before, it's like, okay, we are going to focus on writing. And then you have some students who are like, okay, sure. And then you have some students who are like, all right. And then you have the more prominent, more expressive, oh man, writing.
Huh.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And it can be a total downer, like that initial reaction, the more louder, more expressive group, um, that can affect the whole classroom environment immediately.
Yeah, it can.
Hmm.
So that to me, I sum all that as down to motivation, right? Getting kids.
Motivation. And so as a teacher, in response to motivation, naturally I think, okay, how can I make this subject more engaging to students so that we kind of start turning around the negativity that happens when it comes to writing.
Yeah, that's a big challenge. That's a huge one. And then another one that commonly comes up is just time, right? If you're using writing with your
Hmm.
kids, oftentimes time is an issue because you have your
Hmm.
discipline to teach and you don't have oftentimes a lot of extra time. So, oh,
Especially when the testing season comes around.
yes,
Then it's like everybody just stops doing the learning and more and some time is spent like teaching students the the system of how the test works and then getting them prepared and yeah, during that part of the school year, it just stops. The learning just stops, I
yes.
feel.
And that makes it really hard. I don't know why my share stopped, but I'm going to reshare in a minute.
Okay.
I think I clicked something I didn't intend to click. Here we go. No, sharing the wrong thing. There we go. Are you seeing my considering the writing task now? Are you seeing that?
Mm.
No, not yet.
No, I see it. I see it. I see it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So one thing, now this probably wouldn't be the kind of prompt that you would be giving kids in your discipline, but
Mhm.
oftentimes when we ask kids to write, it's amazing how little time we spend as teachers helping them understand what it is that we want them to write. So just look at this writing task for a minute, and then we'll talk about this from the perspective of our students and how they might potentially struggle with something like this. So
So
I took,
looking at this, from my experience, the essay will be a trigger,
hmm
an immediate trigger.
hmm
Um, and then after that, if I don't break it down as a teacher, the students will immediately be overwhelmed.
yes.
Hmm.
And that was my point that this is, in my mind, this comes from a unit that I have used with students a lot, and it's a high school unit. It's from an English class, and then at the end of this 6 week unit, students have to write this essay, and it's deep, it's complex. There's a lot happening here. So most students are going to struggle with this kind of a prompt. They might be overwhelmed with the fact that they need to write an essay, and then how can we help them? So here's one strategy I like. It's called the do what chart.
Oh, I remember this.
You've seen this before.
Uh-huh.
So it really helps. And there's a video down here to a teacher demonstrating this with her 12th grade students if you'd like to see it. But the do what chart is having kids identify the verbs in the prompt and then figuring out what they're asked to do. Those are the verbs. And then what are they doing? So here's an example from that prompt. Here are the verbs. Write. What are they expected to write? An essay. So I would have the students highlight the verbs And then we would talk as a class about, we would do this as a class, and especially if your students haven't done something like this. I would do this several times with kids so they understand how this process works. So it helps kids figure out what they're expected to do. You're going to be writing an essay, you're going to be analyzing the issues, and we might need to talk about what those issues are as a reminder. They have to indicate what side they're on. They need to support their position, and they need to provide reasons and examples. So here's the prompt again with those verbs highlighted. And I have found that when you do something like that and just spend half a class period with the students on exactly what it is that you want, it helps them and you usually typically get better results. Now, you're probably going to be doing in your discipline more writing to learn activities, activities that are very brief. They're not as long. They're more to assess the student's understanding of your discipline, not to focus per se on writing. But just making sure that kids understand the task is one point I wanted to make, that oftentimes kids get overwhelmed with the task and they never get started because they don't know exactly what we want them to do. So our feedback, I know I have wondered if all the feedback that I provided on student work really makes a difference. Is it worth our time to give kids feedback on their writing? And this is one report that I really like. It's called Informing Writing. There's a link to it here in the slide deck. It's a free PDF. And this person, Stephen Graham, who's probably the leading researcher on writing in our country right now, he puts out these free reports. And he does that rather than writing articles because he wants teachers and parents and principals and others to actually read those reports. This one was all about, he was asking these two questions. Does formative writing assessment enhance student writing? Meaning the feedback that we give them along the way as they're writing, does it help the quality of their writing? That was one question. And the second question was, how can teachers improve formative writing assessment in the classroom? So how can we improve the feedback that we give kids on their writing? And he found the bottom line was a very strong and consistent relationship between the feedback we provide and improved student writing. And his point was our feedback really matters, and it really does. Without our feedback, our students are not typically going to improve in their writing. So he had a few recommendations in terms of how to give good feedback. One of them was mask the students' identities when reading. So oftentimes we have preconceived notions of our students for better or for worse, and we see a name, we automatically have an image in our mind of what kind of work that student is likely to create. That can bias our reading. So if you don't have the students' names on the assignment, it can sometimes can be helpful and surprising to teachers because it sometimes changes the feedback we give. Form a question about the comment. So when I'm writing a paper and someone asks me a question in the margins, I'm not taken aback by that. I'm not intimidated by it, not scared by it. Asking questions about the comment is a way to show that you're an engaged reader and you're interested in their topic. That tends to work really well. That's what the research suggests. And then point out something you think is a good idea, because typically students are used to receiving a lot more criticism on their writing than they are positives. So pointing out positive aspects of the writing can make a really big difference. And he also found out that in all this research that he looked at, that the students need us, but they also need us to be on their side. So the tone we take really matters. If you can adopt a coaching tone with your kids, so they see you as a coach who's there to help, that makes a world of difference. So all of this feedback matters because rewriting is the essence of writing well. It's where the game is won or lost. So asking kids to rewrite after we give them feedback only works if they trust us, they want to use our feedback, the feedback is helpful, and they have an opportunity to revise. So if you're having students do any writing that is beyond just maybe a paragraph where it's more formal writing, you might invite them to revise their work after you give them some feedback. If you're interested in writing yourself, this is the best book I know of on writing. It's called On Writing Well, written by William Zinsser. It's been around forever. It's the book I use in my graduate writing course. It's Principles of Effective Writing. So it's really a fun book. It's actually funny, fun, well written, and
I
you'll,
like those books.
yeah, and it's a great one. You'll actually smile while you read it, and you will really improve as a writer if you want to take the time to read this book. So it's my recommendation. So when we're giving kids feedback, one thing we need to remember is balancing support and challenge. So we want to support them. We want to be positive. We want to give them good feedback, but we also need to challenge them. And if we don't point out areas where they can grow and develop and improve, then we're not really doing our job as well as we could. So when we're giving kids feedback, using a coaching and a positive tone is a good idea. We want to be supportive and specific. So I have received papers back as a writer, and it said something like "great work, A." And that doesn't help me. It's not specific feedback. I really, even if I'm doing really well, I want feedback on why I'm doing well and how I can improve. And then giving kids feedback before they turn in their final drafts is important. So if we're going to take any time at all as teachers to give feedback, I'd recommend we do it before the kids have turned in their final versions so that they can use our feedback to make any changes that would be helpful to them. I'm not going to take the time now because we're a little behind on time, but there's a great video here called Austin's Butterfly, which is these first grade kids who are learning, and it's for you, it will probably be very, very helpful. It's these kids are in an art classroom and they are thinking about how to give feedback to a student on the drafts of his picture of a butterfly. And it's
Mhm.
all about being positive and giving specific feedback. And the difference between the first draft and maybe the seventh or the eighth draft, which was the final one, is amazing. And it was done in a very helpful, supportive, positive way. So I'd invite you to check that one out later. It's maybe 5 minutes long, but it's a really good example of giving feedback in a productive way so that the end result is night and day better than the initial attempt was.
No, that's fine. In art classes, like one of the most important things that students need to do for other students is to give feedback.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. And feedback in a positive way. Like it's very, very demeaning when a student decides to go, oh, this art sucks.
Yeah.
It's not helpful and it's very hurtful.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it especially for you and what you teach, I highly recommend this video, and it would be something great to share with your kids on how to give good feedback. In fact, I think I'm just going to play it for you because it's good enough where I think it might make a difference for you, especially considering what you teach. Um,
What would you guys say to teachers if they're not getting high quality work? Could they learn something from this? And what would you say to them that they could do differently in their classrooms? This is a story called Austin's Butterfly. And it's a true story about a first grade boy. And his name is Austin. And he goes to school, or used to go to school, in a town called Boise, Idaho. And in his class in Boise, Idaho, they were studying butterflies. And he had to do a project. His job in first grade was to draw a butterfly. And this is the butterfly that he picked. Austin had to use this photograph as his model, and he had to draw accurate scientific drawing of this butterfly. This is called a tiger swallowtail. Can you tell, Toby, why it's called tiger?
Because it kind of has the stripes of the tiger right there.
Good. So here was Austin's job. He was supposed to do a scientific drawing of that butterfly. But remember, Austin was only in first grade. And you know what he did? He forgot to look like a scientist carefully. He got his paper and he just started to draw the image of a butterfly that he had in his head. And he wasn't looking like a scientist. And so this is what he drew. Whoa. It's not bad, and it is a butterfly. But does it look exactly like this? No, it doesn't yet. It doesn't look exactly like this yet. And so they didn't look at this and say, good, Austin, you're done. They said, Austin, good start. Now we can start giving you critique so you can do a second draft and make it better, and a third draft and make it better. And you can make it much, much closer to this. And he was ready to go. All of the first graders in his critique group sat on the floor like you guys are, and they decided to split their advice into two kinds. First, just the shape of the wings. And then when the shape was right, they give him advice about the pattern inside the wings. Alia, what would you say?
You can make it much pointier.
Good. These wings could be much pointier. Who else would add something? Atak, what would you say?
About the angle, because not to be mean about
Yes.
the angle, it's just not exact. So
Okay, so show me. Come on up here, Atak. Show me what you would ask him to do slightly differently.
like to make it a little longer,
Longer where? Draw where you would do it.
right there.
Okay, so pull this out longer.
Yeah.
That's very specific, Atak. Thank you. Jamila, what would you say?
It's like triangle.
Good. Jamila, I love that. So you're saying more like a triangle shape. And I agree. Well, you know what? Those first graders came up with most of those same ideas. And you know what Austin said? Said, okay, I'll go try. And he went back to his seat and he drew this.
Wow.
Does this look more like a triangle? Yeah. Did he go out further, like Atak was suggesting?
Yeah.
Did he add some jaggedness here,
Yes.
like Cindy? Did he get rid of that bottom thing?
Yeah.
So he did listen to his friends and he made it better. It's not perfect. Toby, what would you say?
I'd say don't put those little tail things so pointed in. I'd say put them more pointed down.
Good. Okay. And Ethan, what would you say?
Oh, my teacher should make the wings like this, not like this.
Okay. He listened to his friends and they said, this is really a lot better, Austin. That second draft really is better.
Colorblind.
Good. Maybe he could make a third draft. And so he did this draft.
That's his third draft.
That's his third draft, Hadley. That's just right. Elijah, what do you notice there?
Well, one wing's more pointed than the other, and that side is a little bit higher.
Good. Coburn?
Right here, it doesn't have the inside thing still.
Ah, okay. Needs a little bit more of that notch. So do you think maybe he should do a fourth draft?
Yeah.
Well, that's just what he said. He said, shoot, okay, I got round again. I'll go back and do a fourth draft. He listened. Does it look more even like Elijah was suggesting?
Yes.
Yeah. And does it look like it's coming out a little sharper, like Cindy was suggesting? And like Attack was saying, it's a little, the angle looks a little better. So now Austin was feeling really good. He said, am I ready to add some pattern? And they said, okay, why don't you try adding some of the pattern? And he did.
He is so good.
And then they said, Austin, you're ready for color. Let's look at his last draft. And what do you think? Did it come out really good? Yeah. What do you think about how much progress he made? And Tack, what would you say about his progress?
He made like a lot of progress. He persevered doing it. His friends were honest with him.
What was it about the kinds of advice that they gave that allowed him to get better each time? Hassan?
Well, they told him what was wrong about it.
Did they say it's just wrong, or were they more specific?
They were more specific, but they weren't mean about it.
Great. Hadley.
6 drafts.
And so is that something that other kids should learn from? What should we learn from that?
We can make other drafts if it's not right.
Good. So if it's not right, you can keep doing more drafts to make it better.
You just don't use the things in your head. You want to use a sharp eye.
Good. He used the eyes of a scientist. Great.
Wouldn't it be nice if our students were all of that motivated, right?
Yes.
And
That
excited.
was really cute.
Yeah, I like it. I think it relates to what you teach, and it also certainly relates to writing and helping kids write. They need positive, detailed support so that they know what to do.
Yeah, how many tiles are in my jar?
Let me stop that. Okay, so let me go back to, are you seeing Austin's butterfly, the slide up here now?
Yes.
Okay, responding to student writing, yes, okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so probably not as relevant for what you teach because this is more about longer pieces of writing, but no matter what you're doing in terms of feedback, limiting the number of comments you make on students' work and limiting the complexity of those comments is helpful, because at least sometimes if you can do the writing or the assignment that your students are doing, that's a really nice way for you to then be able to talk as an insider as to, here's what I just experienced when I did this assignment, and it helps them with how to do it themselves, because you can give different feedback if you've already done that assignment yourself. So making the feedback that we give our kids make sense to them is really important. If you've got examples, could be art examples that you keep from previous years, or in this case, writing, but keeping models of effective and ineffective writing can be helpful. And using sample papers, typically a typical paper, a strong paper, and a weak paper are really helpful, so kids can better understand what it is that we expect and why. We all have another reason to emphasize writing. When we look at what the state of California expects of high school graduates, these are the college and career readiness anchor standards. So these are the 4 different aspects of literacy and what students who are graduating high school are expected to be able to do. So we'll just focus in on this one. If we look at the one on writing, there are opportunities for writing to happen in all disciplines. And if you just take a look at these points, maybe there are 1 or 2 areas that would fit in the way in which you use writing with your students. So not every teacher is going to address all of these areas. But for example, some of these are, I'm looking for, there was one about short text and long text. Do you see any of these that might fit for your discipline in the ways in which you use writing?
Narratives, number 3.
Okay.
Number 4, because clarity, the clearer the story for my advanced art classes, the one that's more career oriented, when they are creating their own comics or their own animations, like the clearer the story, the easier it is for the audience to figure out what the story is about and understand what is trying to be communicated. Number 5, develop and strengthen writing as needed, as by planning, revising, editing, rewriting, or trying a new approach. Technology for sure. I'm not sure.
So you just mentioned, I think, what, 4 different areas of these 10 that might be appropriate for the ways in which you teach writing or use writing with your kids. And that's the idea, that each teacher looks at a list like this and says, yeah, I do 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 of these with my students, so that at the end of high school, with all teachers focused on writing in their disciplines, their students are probably going to get experience with all 10 of these, but it's not any one teacher's responsibility to try and address all 10. You should be addressing the ones that fit for your discipline, not stretching to use these in authentic ways. So if you found it helpful, you could maybe highlight for your kids the 3 or 4 areas that we will as a class be working on throughout the year, so that when we when we look at who you are as a writer, you can say, okay, well, these are some areas that we're going to focus on in this class, and here's why it's so important, because we want you to have all these skills by the time you finish up high school. So AI, is AI slipping into the art world? Are students generating appropriately or inappropriately work using AI?
Well, when it comes to AI, I know that the school environments are already concerned because some students have tried using AI to write their essay. So now there's an extra requirement about, academic like honesty.
Uh-huh.
There's that extra do not use AI to write your essays.
Right.
Yeah. And when it comes to art, it depends. If it's a digital art class, then yeah, there's definitely like the same thing like about academic honesty. Do not use AI to create your work. You can use AI to as a reference, you can use AI as inspiration, but you cannot use AI images and submit it as your assignment because you just typed in prompts. You did not go through the process of thinking about the assignment and thinking about your ideas and then applying the skills, the art skills and the art concepts that you learned, like on
Yes.
your own with your own two hands.
Yes, exactly. I'm going to get to
Mhm.
that exact point, that when students are using AI, they're not doing the work themselves. They're
No.
not thinking themselves. And if they're not doing the hard work of thinking, they're not growing from the experience. So all
No.
the images I have here, I just put in a prompt into AI, and this is what it generated. So everything here is just AI generated. But the
Mhm.
analogy I have is, so AI is here. It's not going to go away. It's going to be here forever.
Mhm.
And my analogy is, somebody who uses AI, it's like taking a helicopter ride to the top of Mount Everest for a quick selfie.
Mhm.
You can do it. It will take you there, and you can jump out, you can take a picture, you can get back in the helicopter, go back down. But that's nothing like the experience of preparing for, training, and climbing a mountain like Everest all on your own.
Mhm.
So if you rely on the AI, or in this case, the helicopter analogy, you don't get as much from the experience. You don't have to prepare, you don't have to train. It's an arduous, long process, where this woman over here that did it on her own, she has something to celebrate because she has taken months or maybe even years to prepare for this, probably taking away life lessons. There's a lot of preparation and endurance and grit that goes into the hard work of climbing this mountain that this person who used AI has no idea of. They each got
Yeah.
they each got to the top, but the process over here, there is no real learning from the process. Over here, there's a great deal of learning from the process.
For sure. And I also want to say about art as well, especially in where AI is right now. Many of the images in the AI
Hmm.
are stolen images from artists who
Hmm.
actually did the work.
Yep.
And AI is pretty much taking like it at some point it gathered data like and just scrambled them and then made art from these actual artists. So
Hmm.
it's also another theme of academic honesty. It's just like, no, if you use AI, you are stealing from actual artists.
Yeah, and in the writing realm, if you're using AI to help you, quote, write your paper, you're likely stealing from other writers
Mhm.
whose work has been taken up by AI and used to generate whatever it is that they give you. So there are ethical problems on both sides with writing and with art.
That's right.
Yeah. So I'm glad you mentioned that. So to take this analogy one step further, right now, the way that AI is, there are limits to AI, and helicopters can only get us to about 25,000 feet. So if you think about AI as being that helicopter, it can't take you, it cannot go all the way to Mount Everest because Mount Everest is over 29,000 feet. So AI can be helpful, it can be a good tool, but we need the humans to be able to bridge the gap between what AI can do and where we want it or need it to do. So we need humans involved all the way through from beginning to end, making decisions, because my fear, especially with writing, is that without the process being important of doing it yourself and thinking through and learning from the experience, you're not going to grow as a writer. So you can never develop as a writer if all you do is take this helicopter or just use AI. You'll be lost. You won't be well equipped to write without the technology if that's all you do. So in my mind, the process matters a lot.
I also have a note about that too. And that is also one thing that I tell students is when in some animation studios or in some art studios, when you are interviewed, some of them may ask you to draw right there, right in front of them. They'll give you a prompt, and then you got to be able to do it in that set amount of time on your own, and they'll be watching you.
Yeah. And when people applying for jobs, oftentimes they are asked to respond to a prompt to demonstrate their writing ability right there, no technology, and they might be watching you. So you need to have that real world experience in both art and writing. Otherwise, you won't be able to do those real world tasks. So AI is probably going to be helpful and useful up to a point, but we need to help students with how and when it's appropriate. And I think that's the key at this point. I really like this idea of a mentoring stance with writing. So if you're going to be teaching writing, we really need to have, if we want to have culturally sustaining pedagogies, we really need to have established a sense of trust, safety, and mutual respect before we can really ask kids to get into the teaching and learning that's possible. So a mentor, if students can see us as a mentor, mentors tend to be trusted, they tend to be safe people, and there tends to be mutual respect. So I like this idea of teaching while using this mentoring stance. And unless kids are receiving and benefiting from the comments we provide, they're probably just going to look at them as judgments rather than opportunities to expand their knowledge and skills as developing writers. So if you think about this image of the more experienced teacher mentoring a less experienced writer and providing feedback in a trusting, safe, respectful way, then the feedback tends to be much more well received than it would be if it's just a teacher providing kind of typically fairly negative feedback in writing. It's a very different experience from a student perspective. So think about how you might manage the paper load in teaching writing well. For example, minimal marking, which is just you give students some quick feedback, but it might just take you 10 seconds. There's lots of ways to give feedback. And if you have a favorite idea that you like in terms of giving feedback or something that works for you as a teacher of writing, I'd love to hear it. My example is here. Here would be one thing I would share. I like this hamburger approach. I like the idea of the buns are the positive. So you start with something positive, get students on your side. In the middle of your feedback, you provide them with their constructive criticism so that you are giving them some guidance on how to get better. And then you end with another positive comment. This is the ideal so that students see you as, okay, there's some good here too. There's some good things happening, and here's what I need to work on. Kids tend to be able to take feedback like that much more willingly than they would if it's all, here's what you need to do to improve. So rather than me just sharing, Jessica, anything you want to share about something that works well for you when you use writing with your kids?
So we also use the hamburger approach as well, and it does help. Because again, the students love hearing the pauses, And
Mm.
then they are able to handle the negatives, especially if the negatives are constructive rather than punitive.
Yeah.
And then receiving positive feedback just to remember, hey, I'm still good.
Mhm.
Like I'm still good. I just need to work on a little bit more. Another strategy that I like when I touch and ed was there would be a key.
Mhm.
So they're on a separate piece of paper, and the students will take time to learn the key. So the key is a paper, and it's almost, I don't want to say rubric. It's more like a list of symbols, and the symbols represent like, oh, capitalization, grammar,
Mhm.
missing commas or something like that. And then this other symbol means run-on sentence. This
Mhm.
other symbol means sentence fragment. And it's all of these, or like this other symbol means um, off topic.
Uh-huh.
And then students learn all the symbols and then what they mean so that when the teacher grades their work, they're just writing the symbols down.
Mhm.
And then the students consult the key, and then they go, oh, okay, so um I my sentence ran on, I forgot the period, or they go, oh, like, yeah, my paragraph doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a time saver for the teacher, and it's helpful for students because they have a full explanation with the key, and so
Hmm.
it's a time saving technique that really can work well. And
Hmm.
I used to do the same thing. The only reason I don't do that now is because I have students submitting their papers in PDF format, and because I
Uh-huh.
Adobe Pro, I have the ability to insert comments, and one of the comments that I can insert is an audio file. So I typically give a lot of audio-based feedback. I just insert audio files and talk through the feedback I want to give to students. That saves me time, and they like
Hmm.
it because it's very detailed and it's a human voice, and they find it very uh,
Personable.
personable. Yeah, personable and specific. So that's why I got away from the key idea. I used to use that. Now, because the audio feedback is so easy, I can just talk through things, and it's actually quicker for me.
And I think the students would appreciate that too, because sometimes the markings on the paper, or like them having to read everything, is
Hmm.
kind of like a emotional setback for them, because they see the paper and it's filled with
Yeah.
stuff, and even though some of the stuff may be positives, they think about the negatives.
Yeah, and
Oh.
one of our previous slides talked about trying to limit the number and the complexity of our comments. So if they
Mhm.
see a paper riddled with our comments, even if they're positive, they tend to get overwhelmed. So limiting
Mhm.
what we have to point out is helpful.
Also, as an art teacher, I have a lot of colored pens. So
Hmm.
instead of using red, which by a certain amount of time, the students associate red with bad,
Yep. Hmm.
everything bad. So I use purple, I use blue, and then different shades of different colors. And then my students actually responded well when I give feedback on their work, because they're like, oh, it's green today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's different, it's novel, and it's not intimidating because it's not red, right? So they
Yes.
more positively.
Hmm.
So if you are also interested in giving feedback using various software tools, here are some of the ways that teachers can give good feedback using audio or video. And all of these, I think, except for Camtasia, are free. And if you haven't used any of these before, they're all available, and there are ways to do screen captures. And so what a lot of teachers do is they'll open up a student paper and they'll kind of open up their screen capture and use Screencast-O-Matic or something, and they'll talk through as they read the paper their thoughts and then send students the video. And it saves everybody time, and the students like that approach. So that's one option. If you haven't done this kind of feedback, you might try some of these tools. Okay, so 3 minutes left. So any questions that we have at this point? Anything you want to talk about or ask about?
Um, I think we covered quite a lot. I would ask if students continue using AI, like how exactly do we guide them away from it? Because some students will like I hear from my colleagues,
Mhm.
and my colleagues are everywhere, and then they said, "Oh, we talk about academic honesty, and yet students are still submitting those I can tell they are still using ChatGPT or whatever it is they're using. Um and and so how do we address that, the students who are still just
Yeah, that's a
continuing?
hard one. They're going to try and take the shortcut whenever they can. So what
Mm-hmm.
some teachers do is they collect a handwritten sample of every student's writing in the early in the school year. So they have a sample of what students can do as writers. And
Mm-hmm.
it's all about voice. The voice of a writer is unique. And so if you have samples of student writing, you have a sense of what their voice is. And then if they're just using AI and that's all they're doing, and they're trying to turn in something that they've just used AI to create, it's very unlikely it's going to have a very authentic voice. It's not going to match the voice of the student. So one thing that teachers can do is tell students that it's important for you to learn how to write and try and get them to buy into the importance of writing. And establishing a voice, a unique voice as a writer is really important. This is your unique voice. Nobody else has this voice as a writer. Here are some writing samples that you've already created for me that I have in your portfolio. This is your voice, and I know your voice now. And so I want you to, if you're going to use AI, there are some ethical ways to use it to generate ideas, to brainstorm, maybe to help reduce the word count. But if students aren't doing the writing themselves, their voice will be different. The teacher will know that, and that's a place to start anyway. Um, so sometimes it's hard, it's awkward to try and accuse a student of plagiarism because you're not sure if they used AI, but a gentle approach would be, this doesn't seem to represent your voice as a writer. And then you can ask questions and try and get a sense of whether or not the student was actually the person who crafted this message. But I like to come back to the idea of voice, unique voice. Everybody has one as a writer. And if you're using AI, it's not your voice.
So it's like telling a student, hey, like I'm looking for your art style,
Your
not
style, not AI.
yeah.
Maybe you generate a first draft using AI and then, okay, now our next mission is let's use our voices to personalize this draft and
Ooh,
make
I like that.
it
And
something that's actually ours. And how do we do that? So there are ways to do it, but it's not easy.
mhm.
And there's no simple answer for how to make it work for everybody because kids are doing they're kids. They're going to try and take the shortcut if they can.
Yeah. But you see that in in nature.
Yes, you
Like
do. Laziness, human nature. We want to take the easy way.
uh-huh. If it's easy, if it's less energy, they will do it. But I digress. Like it is true. And I do like the positive aspect of like, hey, let's find your style.
Mhm.
Yeah, let's find your voice. And I think that's very empowering.
Yeah.
Mhm. I think that is pretty much all of the questions that I have and I can think of.
Okay.